Hello, my name's Tamara and I'm here to share the results and the information from our Brexit report and manifesto, which Fashion Roundtable, the organisation I set up in November last year, have brought together based on a series of roundtables and surveys that we've done with people from the fashion industry, so that we at last can give a voice to the concerns of the industry as we negotiate the Brexit terms and conditions. And over to the rest of the people who are here with me today, introducing Eszter Kantor.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm an economist. I've been working with Fashion Roundtable since December and I'm based in Brussels and advising them on the situation in Brussels. I have been involved previously in trade negotiations for the US government and have worked for the European Commission as an external consultant.
And then we've got Sam.
I'm Nicholls. I'm the political director of Fashion Roundtable, and my role is principally to support Tamara in the brilliant work that she does for Fashion Roundtable.
And then we've got Nav.
I'm Nav Lehl. I work for the UK in a Changing Europe think tank, which looks at UK and EU relations. So I work mainly on politics and how politics is evolving while we leave the EU. And on the Fashion Roundtable, I provide political analysis.
And then we have Karen.
Hi, I'm been brought on board to cover diversity in fashion, as well as one of Tamara's fashion experts.
Thank you. So I'm just going to turn to Nav and ask Nav, could you give just an overview of the current situation, where we're at with Brexit, and the kind of landscape that we're facing at the moment?
So just before, just before this month, Theresa May successfully negotiated the transition phase, which in basic term means it's the next stage, I suppose, after we officially leave the EU in March next year. So transition period is 21 months and it concludes in December 2020. And during those 21 months, it provides certainty to businesses, especially on future trade deals post-Brexit. Again, also, aside from businesses, it will be David Davis, Liam Fox, who are all in the Brexit department, will be negotiating trade deals with countries across the world, so outside the EU. So the transition phase also includes the divorce bill, so how much are we going to have to pay once we leave the EU. Looking in terms of the landscape, in terms of public opinion and the mood towards Brexit, it's pretty much the same. In terms of people are still very supportive of Brexit. In terms of immigration, it's not as a salient issue as it was back during the referendum. In fact, actually, people have more of a positive view towards immigration.
So what you're saying is that the numbers, the figures in terms of leave or remain are the same?
Pretty much the same. Pretty much the same.
But the consensus on immigration has shifted?
Yeah, it's more positive, should we say. I think we can all agree that during the referendum, immigration played, yes, a very prominent role, but also quite negative and unpleasant vibe to it during the referendum, and now it's slightly more positive, should we say. In terms of where we are with how Brexit will impact fashion, so a couple of things. During the transition phase, EU citizens will have the same rights and privileges as they have now. That will not change during these 21 months. So if you're an EU citizen residing here, you're absolutely fine during those 21 months. It's the kind of default assumption of citizens' rights, immigration, should we say, is that it's likely that EU citizens will have to apply for a certificate of sponsorship, work permit, in order to work here, which is very relevant to the movement of people that work in the fashion industry, from photographers, models, to traders and designers.
So that's a concern, because the majority of the sector is freelance.
Freelance, yeah.
And working on very last minute verbal contracts quite a lot of the time. We actually, Karen and I tried to, we spoke to about 20 designers, and they're all going to see their manufacturers at the moment overseas, because this is the time that they would do that in the season. And that therefore is a key concern for all of us who are always fluid and flexible and in and out, how that's going to impact on us. So do you think, I know there's something that Fashion Roundtable supports, which is Free Move Create, which is advocacy for freedom of movement for all creatives. Do you think that that's something that the government would consider?
At the moment, the Home Office is working on providing settled status to around 3 million EU citizens. That's just at the moment. It's not a surprise that the Home Office haven't really come to a conclusion on how they're going to form their immigration policy post-Brexit. It's likely that so once we actually, after transition phase, after December 2020, EU citizens wanting to come here to work or to settle, it's very much going to rely on whatever the UK immigration policy will be then, and that we just don't know yet. During the transition phase, up until December 2020, it's fine. It's very much the same as it is now, with a few movements here and there, but it's very much overridingly the same. But it's just post-December 2020, that's when we just don't know. There won't be a free movement of people, that's for sure. Whatever the UK immigration policy will be, who knows? But that will be discussed during the transition phase.
So do you think that there's, because what I've heard through the people that I know is a growing concern of should they be considering relocation or second passports? The reality of going from having freedom of movement and access to markets to being way down the list is
but you've also got to remember that we're also supporting the idea of not being part of the single market.
The UK is.
The UK is not wanting to be a part of the single market, and the single market is based on the 4 freedoms of goods, services, people and capital, and it very much heavily relies on the free movement of people. And seeing as we want to leave, the UK anyway supports to leave single market, it will. So
I know it's something that Sam's going to pick up on later, but Fashion Roundtable advocates maintaining single market status because of these issues which affect the fashion industry. So if sectors such as the fashion industry had a more powerful voice in the understanding coming back to government than, say, fishing does, which has become my trigger word, which makes 1.9 billion for the UK versus our nearly 30 billion. Do you think that that would impact on the policies that the government are deciding to push forwards?
I think at this moment, in where we are in terms of the Brexit process, it's a bit hard to say whether it's too late in the game. The Labour Party, for example, have their own campaign, remaining in the single market. Public opinion have, looking at polls, as I do, look at polls all the time, there isn't a lot of support for remaining in the single market, bearing in mind that one of the key issues was immigration, wanting to end free movement of people. So in terms of public opinion, there isn't a lot of strong support for remaining in the single market. Whether Theresa May or David Davis, Liam Fox negotiate different rules and regulations for different sectors like fishing, agriculture, and of course fashion, who knows? But that again is something that will have to be discussed later on.
I think a really key thing here is that actually we're in a little bit of a middle ground, and that it's not necessarily the case that decisions have been made on things, I don't think, and actually the ambiguity in the public opinion on these issues is an opportunity.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's absolutely essential that sectors are capturing the narrative on this thing, because
that's why fishing's my trigger word.
Well, and they have every right as much as us to put forward their agenda. I think that what's just going to be really essential is that we use the strength of voice there is around this issue in the sector, but in the wider creative sectors, to help the policymakers come to the point where they could recognise the value. Because what we're talking about is not an immigration policy in the traditional sense. We're not thinking about this from the perspective of permanent settlement. No. We're thinking about this from the perspective of the free and very short-term movement of labour.
Exactly.
And I think that's a really important distinction to make.
So
I just wanted to ask a question.
Yeah.
Everyone's talking about movement and coming into the UK and all of this. Being a part of the fashion industry, my concern isn't who's coming in. My concern is, can I leave?
Exactly.
Can I make money when I leave? Am I going to be taxed double? Are the people here that are making most of their goods abroad because there's not enough facilities here for them to make the goods perfectly well here? Most people now that are doing very well in the industry are getting their goods made in China, in Turkey. The big concern is, are they still going to be able to deal with the price points when they come back into the country and when they try to resell, because that's going to make everything go to the floor, because there's not enough facilities here for the right price for the traders to make the money back on what they're creating.
Eszter, do you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, so in terms of if you guys work very often in the European Union, you need to know that there's a reciprocity requirement. So if you introduce visa requirements towards any EU member state, the EU will reciprocate and you will need a work permit. And it's not just going to be difficult for you as a freelancer, it is going to be difficult for companies as well, because they have to, who want to hire you, you know, because they need to do the paperwork, they need to think in advance. You can't pick up a work 2 days in advance. You need to think months ahead and schedule
it. It is going, but works.
Yes, but in terms of when it comes to negotiating a trade agreement, this can be an ask from the UK government, and this can be an ask that your industry is pushing. So because you need to pull together, because you're complaining about the fisheries sector, but you need to know what you can do to bring the industry to have a voice that resonates with policymakers, actually, that they can put something down to the table and ask the EU, guys, we are not going to cut taxes, because that's what the EU is really afraid of, that the UK is going to cut taxes and it's going to go to a race to the bottom, and then they won't be able to be competitive, the EU member states. So you can say, okay, we're not going to cut taxes, corporate taxes, below EU member states, but in exchange, we want to have some sort of a visa agreement for freelancers or short-term assignments or something. So these are worth considering.
So it's a negotiation tactic, that we say that we are offering freelancer support in terms of not becoming Singapore on Thames and cutting taxes and becoming this offshore tax haven.
I think there's an inequality potentially about the way that SMEs are going to have to operate in the future against
small to medium-sized enterprises, which is most of the industry, 90% of the industry is that.
Because if you're a major financial organisation or a major consultancy or someone with several thousand members of staff, the idea of being able to open flexibly a new office on the continent is not that shocking. It happens now, even sort of regardless of the decision to leave the European Union. So I think it's really key that that's a really central part of what it is we're trying to get across here, that there are people who are significant contributors within the scale of the community they're operating in, and that we should not be advocating for a policy which directly discriminates against them. We should be encouraging it.
Companies can handle it. Single traders cannot. Without the single trade having that ability, number one, to still get their things made abroad and not be overtaxed because we're no longer a part of the EU, that's going to slam everything against the wall. And then what? You don't have people spending money in restaurants. You don't have people spending money on clothing anymore, because the fashion industry is what, I guess, when I think of it as the diamond of the British culture, you can't come for anyone in fashion in London. Everybody wants to hire someone from London. Everybody wants to dress from London. That's their stamp. If the government doesn't start recognizing that that's one of their biggest traders, things are going to go mental, because the fashion industry is what holds the British culture as a stamp abroad. They make more money than anyone. I don't care about a big company. Who cares? We're talking about the little people, because all these millions of little people are the people that are spending all the money, that are buying the houses, that are paying the taxes, and that are having the mortgages.
Yeah. So I mean, I agree with you. I think it's completely not only. I definitely don't want to go back to a time where there's a queue to get into Paris, because you won't get booked. I mean, that's the reality. Eszter, I want to come on to you, because you've worked in the States and you live in Brussels. How do you think the perception of of the UK is at the moment, and what opportunities do you think there are open for us?
I think, so what Nav described is we are looking ahead for 2 years, and until December 2020, nothing will change. Basically, everything will operate the same way, but during the last almost 2 years until 2020, there's going to be a discussion on a new trade agreement, and this new trade agreement is where the industry and the British people have to come together and make sure that they speak to their local policymakers, and the fashion industry is going to be one of those industries that need to make their voices heard, because there are so many issues pending, and if they don't, agriculture will take everything. Yeah. Agriculture is always a priority. You've mentioned fisheries, it's part of it, and they will topple everything.
Make less money for the UK by
it. Doesn't matter. Yeah. But you have to make your voices heard. The European Commission will dictate the terms. They have a very well-known and respected team of negotiators. It's a different team than what is negotiating now. You have to understand. So it is going to be a completely different set of discussions than what you see now on a weekly basis. And it's going to be a fast negotiation. I think a lot of things have already decided, because there's such a regulatory coordination. There's such regulatory coordination between the two parties, the UK and the EU. So there will be just a few areas: state aid, taxes, China, other relations. And there's one more thing: the UK would want to have a free trade agreement with the US as well. So that's a very different kind of discussion. And the EU and the UK don't have a trade agreement, so they have very different standards, requirements. It's going to be interesting to see how the UK will be able to handle that.
Because are you saying that if we go into a trade deal where the majority of our clothes go to Europe at the moment, and they have to fit EU standards, and that works in terms of regulations and safeguards. But if we're trying to go into a new market and we want to relax those laws, obviously, therefore, we could potentially lose.
Exactly. So if you relax,
not only does that affect reputation, it affects business.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So it can go both ways.
Okay.
Yes.
So. Do you see any positive opportunities coming out of what's coming? And the thing is we're talking about 2020 as though it's miles away. In fashion terms, that's very close.
Yes.
Because we're always 6 months to a year ahead. So that's around the corner for us. So then what happens? Do we have any idea of where we're going?
Well, that's a good question. Do the UK policymakers have any idea where they're going? Because that's the beginning of every trade negotiation. What are your objectives? Where do you see your country? And let's forget these big slogans of Global Britain, because they mean nothing. What's really behind it? What are your objectives? Where do you see your country in 5 years? And when we are talking about where do you see your industry in 5 years?
Well, hopefully not on the floor, Karen. I don't know.
I'm not so sure.
So, because before I just come to Sam, one thing that Assay Advisory did an impact assessment for fashion industry, and a hard Brexit it comes in at 38% loss to GDP.
Yes.
For most people in the industry, the last 10 years have been tougher than they were before, people who've had a longer career. And there are, I heard from a fantastic designer only last night who's now moved into a different kind of graphic design job because she's had to rethink her career. This is quite common.
Yes.
So I can assure you that we as a community cannot afford a 38% loss.
Yeah,
it's already breadline for a lot of people.
I don't think that's going to happen.
You don't?
I don't think that's going to happen.
Well, that's a relief.
Yes. Yeah, but we'll see how the trade agreement is going to, and that's the responsibility of all the stakeholders and the industry participants. Talk to the policymakers, because they have no idea, trust me.
I do, because we sent out in January a piece of advice based on some terms and conditions of EU policy that should be checked on, which you had written up for me, we sent out. to lobby the government. And MPs have checked on this, and the government haven't replied because it's the real minutiae of trade deal negotiations.
It's the little things.
It's scary for them.
Yes, it's the little things. It's about how to move goods from one place to another, how many times they will be checked. You know, even if fashion items will not be tariffed, if something else is tariffed and the trucks will be stopped, all trucks will be stopped. You know, because some transporters have a variety of goods, they carry a different variety, so they're just gonna stop them randomly and check what's in your haulage, and you know, let's see.
Yeah,
I'm not against that personally.
Yeah,
I'm not trying to blow up tomorrow for any reason of any kind. Not to be rude. I don't think still that's a concern of time. It's all about the money.
Yeah.
It's about if everyone can still get their things delivered.
Yes.
Safely.
Yes.
The same price.
But it is about time, because that's about availability, which impacts reputation. So I think they're all connected. Sam, do you just want to give us a little breakdown of the paper and why we're supporting the various issues that we're supporting?
Yeah, so I think the most pertinent thing to say about the paper is that, unlike a lot of organisations seeking to do what we do, we're not using our opinions and what we think to define the agenda. We've been really honest from the start that we are receptive in totality to what it is that we are being told. This report, very early on in our existence, really reflects that. It's a report that echoes the concerns that have been raised to us over the last 9 months, but to you for the last 2 years. And all we've done is take what people have been telling us very consistently, and the messaging is sensationally clear and unified, and put that into 3 simple policy objectives that we hope the general public and anyone interested in what it is we're saying will be receptive to. Now, of course, we can't force an agenda, and we're not going to push what we believe as an authority over anything else, because I'm not really sure that's how it works. But I think what I really want people to be able to take out of the report is that it's an echo. It's an echo of what it is that we have been hearing, and all we're doing, as we said right at the start we wanted to do, is unifying that voice in a central place and giving it the oxygen of publicity, to quote Margaret Thatcher. Not something I do usually. And you know, and that's something I'm really proud of. So the three key policy areas that we're looking at revolve around the single market. I think a lot of the discussion today has reflected that. Something that's not been picked up so much is about maintaining a degree of centrality around support programs, educational organisations, the sorts of transnational opportunities that it would just be a real shame from the industry and the wider creative sector's perspective to turn our back on. And we're not just talking about money. I think the positivity and the excitement and the engagement that things like the City of Culture programme do is really sort of demonstrative of what these kind of engagement opportunities can do, not only for regions, for communities, but also for businesses. And, you know, without willing to prescribe why Brexit happened, I think if we can go some way to ameliorate the concerns felt in communities across the country, the feeling of isolation, the feeling of economic recession, if we can go some way to help overcome that, fashion being a really good way, I think, and historically that has been shown time and time again, then that's going to be a really positive thing. And so this is a lovely manifesto point, because it's not politics with a capital P. It's about saying, do you know what, this thing we've got here is brilliant. Forget whether it's got the EU branding on it. Let's just recognise its benefit and what it does for people, for communities, and for businesses. And so let's be an advocate for it. And you know, and again, it's an echo. It's something we're passionate about, but it's something that we're being told is important.
I mean, I think it's something that we at Fashion Roundtable have heard time and time again. I've been amazed that we've hit in a way it feels like a zeitgeist of people who every day I'm hearing from someone who hasn't felt heard or validated or been respected. I think that goes across issues of representation, sustainability and supply chains. And Brexit actually is the kind of melting pot of this, because without EU protections, which safeguards sustainability rights and modern day slavery, long term those are concerns of mine personally with if we start to change from alignment with the EU, which I've been assured isn't on the agenda, but who knows where we're at, as you've highlighted. And also in terms of protection of wages, access, and that all frames reputation, which I think is Karen's point. So one thing I picked out when I just had another look at the paper on the way here is 56% of the people who responded to the survey would change their vote if there was a policy agenda coming from government which was supportive of the industry. That's a really interesting, that's more than half. So 80% want the single market, which is what we've advocated for. But what were some other facts from that, Sam, that you've picked out? Are there anything you want to highlight?
So I think, without focusing specifically on policy elements, the thing that really struck me was just the consistency of messaging. It's very rare, certainly in my experience, to find that around an area that is so politically contentious to have such a unified approach to how we think it needs to be approached or dealt with or resolved or supported. And in that sense, it was an easy paper to write. I think what I think would be good to do going forward is to say, right, this is the timeline that we're on now. This is the hurdle we've just got over. Let's look to 6 months' time when hopefully work that we're doing now takes us to the next 10,000 people and then to the next 50,000 people, cutting across the border, not only from the UK's perspective, but the industry in countries all across Europe. Because, quite rightly, as you say, Karen, it's not just about us caring about who's coming here, it's about how are we engaging abroad. And so getting a perception of what a business based in Switzerland or Denmark or countries that are necessarily not directly affiliated with the EU, I think is going to be really important. And that's what I hope this paper can be used as a springboard for.
I was just going to say something, and that is from the point of view of Britain. If you look at the map, you see these large trading blocs. It's not just the EU, it's NAFTA, it's Mercosur, it's now the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
So what do these mean in layman's terms?
So that countries form single markets to a certain extent, free trade zones. So the UK is opting out of one. What is it going to do with this? So is it going to
going into another?
Yes. Are you going to go into another? There were discussions of aligning with TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Okay, we're in the Atlantic.
Yes.
Go for that, Karen.
Actually, that was a point of concern, but it doesn't seem to be a big issue.
Okay.
So but it's still a majority of UK businesses have their stakeholders and have their customers in the EU and not in Australia or in Japan. So that's one thing that you should consider, but also think about what you're going to do with the freedom, and freedom is a lonely thing. I'm a Hungarian, so it's just this kind of negative thinking is very specific to Eastern Europeans, and freedom is often perceived as ultimate freedom is isolation. Yes.
So Karen, have you got any kind of questions that you'd like to ask about this?
Well, of course, the same question I've been asking all the time is, what's going to happen to the biggest commodity that London has, which is fashion, which is the people, not just the designers, the manufacturers, the stylists, the photographers. There's not enough work here for anyone to be able to pay their mortgage.
No. Yeah.
90% of everyone's work is outside, is in Paris, is in Milan especially, is in Switzerland. That's what we have.
Yeah.
And my fear is that the people that are not just designers, or the people that are not like Burberry, who already have a backup for everything that they do, all the young new designers. It's kind of like everyone comes here to go to school to learn how to do fashion.
Yeah.
What are we getting? I think Britain's given everybody everything of what they have creatively, but what are we getting back? We need that freedom to work abroad. We need to know that we're not going to be taxed extra. We need to know we don't need a visa at the last minute if a job comes in. You know, all of that freedom, is that going to be taken away from us? Because that's going to be our reality.
Yes. Yeah.
And do you think that any of that's on the table at the moment? It isn't, is it?
Well, Fashion Roundtable is here to bring it to the table.
Exactly, absolutely. Bring it to the table.
We're here to support the people that work in fashion, not just one sector.
Yes, absolutely. That is why we said
absolutely.
There's 1,000 of freelancers that are paying mortgages on the back of working abroad. Is that all going to stop?
Yeah.
Are we going to be cut in half with our price now because we can't get abroad in 2 hours? Because that's how the work is going as a freelancer.
And it is 27% of our survey, and I actually think it could be higher if it became harder, prepared to relocate. And certainly that's conversations that I didn't think I'd be having. Is there anything you want to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, I mean, just bouncing off from what Karen was saying, there is a fear that if we do not negotiate a favourable deal with the EU, it will hit fashion businesses hard because they will be hit with import tariffs, higher tariffs on all their exports.
It's already a struggle.
Exactly. So that is if we don't reach a favourable deal. That is if with the EU. So you will be subject to import tariffs. You know, not to mention the unnecessary and cumbersome administrative costs. You know, paperwork, all that sort of stuff, and that will really slow down the process. As you both mentioned before, it's a fast-paced environment. It's last minute, it's very, on the go, you've got to be flexible. So these sort of things can actually hinder the process.
Is this something that Fashion Roundtable can lobby? Is this something that we can bring to the table and say, listen, this has got to be dealt with. It cannot be ignored because 6 months down the line, you're talking about 1,000 people not being, we're just talking about 1,000, it's about 5,000. But there's about 1,000 people that's not going to be able to trade. And they're not going to be able to go to that job in Milan in the day that they've been booked because of some, I got to get a visa routine. We got to make this happen. We got to take it there.
Or you book the job and then you're stopped at the border. That's the worst.
Really? That's not going to work.
I mean,
there's not enough work here. There just isn't.
I think it's really important that a lot of the dialogue around leaving the European Union has, understandably focused around what could potentially be some really dangerous outcomes. What I would always come back to is that ultimately the economy talks. And I think that we should always have confidence in the fact that something that will damage the economy in a clear way is something that everyone is in agreement we want to avoid. It's not really a right or wrong answer. And now whether there are wider political implications of what is a deep set economic cause, well, I mean, that's open for discussion. But I think we shouldn't be worried that what we're going to face in 3 years' time is something so politically offensive that we're going to see people in a really productive, really economically viable industry collapsing. I find it very unlikely.
I wish I could agree. I wish I could agree, but I can't wholeheartedly agree.
That's not reality.
Because sometimes politicians make decisions not because they want to destroy your economy, but because they don't know what the implications of their decisions would be. So that's why they need to drill down to every sector and talk to everyone. They don't want to hurt you, but they do because they don't know.
I mean, I have consistently, and this has been consistently for over a year now, since before I set up Fashion Roundtable, been the only person from a sector of nearly 1 million people sitting at really dry meetings with policymakers across Whitehall and Westminster and lobbying and saying, this, that and the other, and I'm worried, and are you worried, and what about, and they are shocked when we hit them with the stats and the value and the economics and the vibrancy and the opportunity, because we're at nearly 30 billion. I think we could do better. I think if there was a more inclusive, ratio of of support for the working class people, my background, coming in now. It's even harder than it was. If there was more regional support, when I went to the UK in a Changing Europe event on devolved governments, there didn't seem to be enough joined up thinking for as a laywoman sitting there in terms of what they're going to do around Brexit. What could they do to support talent? What could we do to support UK talent to make it more? There's no reason, even with sustainability having to be at the fore of agendas, that we couldn't be making 50 billion as a business, that we couldn't be flowing with business, but unless it's understood, and the reason I set up Fashion Roundtable is I could not carry on being a lone voice. It's ridiculous because we talk about the catwalk shows, we talk about designers, but I wasn't represented by any of those bodies. As a freelancer, I certainly wasn't, and nobody that I knew was represented apart from maybe 4 designers. That's not good enough. And unless you're able to talk about these policies with policymakers, you change the narrative. And you know, I know phishing's my trigger word, but they've done a really good job of getting, for a small business, they've done amazing. And that's what I would hope that we could offer, because I want to be optimistic. I don't want to be the voice of doom, because I think this industry has so much potential, and it's a fantastic business to work in. It's really creative, it's full of engaging people, but my concern is that if the talent leaves, the models leave, the magazines leave, then we leave, and that's the reality of it. I've just got, before we go, a couple of questions. So something that came up a couple of weeks ago is that Switzerland might be entering the single market. So we've been talked about, whenever I've gone to a meeting, by civil servants, what about the Swiss model? Which for me, having worked in Switzerland quite a lot recently, has meant queuing. And quite stressful. Do you think that's is that on the agenda, do you know?
So interestingly, Switzerland is not in the EU, but they are, via a series of bilateral agreements, sectoral agreements, they are part of the single market. So
but they're not in the customs
union.
They
are not in the, I don't think they are in the customs union. I'm not 100% sure about that. But the thing is, I don't think they are going to join. And they don't need to.
Okay.
At the same time, they pay in to the EU budget, and they have their own financial mechanism to support the least developed regions in Europe. So they do spend money on the EU. The same thing for Norway, actually. So,
and then Northern Ireland. So according to some data I had from the government, Ireland is our biggest trading partner within the EU. If you were a bigger brand at the moment, given what's going on with the borders in Northern Ireland, would you be thinking about having a holding logistics office in Ireland or Northern Ireland, just to get around the issues?
It depends where your supply chain is located. Is it in mainland Europe? Is it in the United States? Is it in Ireland? What sort of relationships do you have down the supply chain? Yes, it would. If it's it can make life easier. If current plans happen, that they realize what they are planning to do is that they have going to be a border crossing at the Northern Irish border from the UK to Northern Ireland, then yes, it would make sense.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens with that, though.
And then I've heard from a few businesses, vary in the terms, but that a country, Portugal, has been offering what's called the Golden Passport. From one big business, I was told it was 5 years tax-free. From another smaller business, but very successful, who's been here over 20 years. They're moving, it's 10 years. What could the UK do to lure people so that we become, instead of a place where we're talking about exodus, we're talking about attraction? Because I think the terms around Brexit have all been around nerves, lack of business, loss of money, loss of value. What can we do to create attraction?
So do I understand correctly that by golden passport you mean that they were giving tax cuts to companies that are investing in Portugal?
Yes.
So I would be super careful with that, because this is what the EU can consider state aid. And you see what happened with Ireland and Apple, where they charged them $13 billion because Apple got a tax.
How much did they make in what were the? Do you know what the figures were?
I'm not. It was a very old tax, actually in place since 1997 or something like that, for a long time, and it was later on raised, but still it was not good enough for the Commission, so they fined Ireland, sorry, not Northern Ireland, and I would be very careful to, if the UK is out of the EU and they do not align state aid policies, this is an opportunity. But this is exactly what the EU would like to avoid.
Right.
So this is the negotiating bargain.
So what you're saying is a country inside the EU can make appealing offers of attraction and tax breaks without being scolded by the EU.
No, they cannot. No, they cannot. So this is going. If I don't know how Portugal is going to pull this off, to be honest, because this can be considered state aid, and this is, I don't know. I'm sure they know what they are doing. So let them do, but this is not something that is looked upon favorably.
So what can we do that's not going to have Brussels breathing down our neck, but is attractive?
So you can say that you are not aligning state aid policies with Brussels. You can say them,
what does
guys,
that mean
so that you are giving tax benefits or any kind of direct compensation subsidies to certain sectors, which you're not allowed to do now as an EU member state. But if you are exiting the EU and you decide, okay, we're not aligning state aid policies, then you can give direct subsidies to certain sectors, and that can be tax cuts to industries as well.
So we can give tax cuts?
Well, when you exit and you decide to go down that path, you can.
I think it's. I don't really like the idea of living in a Britain which actively seeks to undercut our European neighbours, our neighbours across the Atlantic, and just generally trading partners around the world. I think it's really important, actually, that when we think about incentivising businesses to come to the UK, that we're talking in terms of infrastructure, we're talking in terms of good schools, we're talking in terms of somewhere you can buy a house and get on the housing market.
But the reality, Sam, is that most of us, and that's what Karen's talking about, most of us have had to work abroad to make a living or be mobile. That's the economic baseline of the majority of people at the creative end of the sector has been a growing legion of freelancers who've had to be geographically mobile. So infrastructure is long term. This is survival now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it necessarily changes, though, whether a country is attracted to trade in or not. I mean, trade is predicated around identifying consumers that you want to target with your product and effectively ensuring that they can access your product. Now, it's much easier to effectively target and provide that product if you are in an environment that promotes, the freedom of trade and open and transparent marketing and business relations. I mean, I don't think we should be looking at the solution to Brexit as being actively trying to undercut any of our partners, because it's a race to the bottom, as Eszter said, and it's a race I think we will lose.
Yeah.
If we start going down a tax break pathway, what other areas are we sacrificing in order to do that? And I think it's dangerous.
Okay. Karen, have you got any questions before we close?
No, I think, I don't think there's any more. As long as we don't have to lower our prices, to survive. Yeah. Because no one can afford to lower the prices any lower than what
they're already low.
Yeah.
We're talking about everything. We're not only talking about freelancers, we're talking about traders, designers here. They can no longer lower their prices anymore. This is our biggest fear.
Yeah.
And if they're going to be taxed when they're trying to deliver goods in Europe. That, to me, that should be the biggest concern.
So what do you think about suggestions to open up towards Australia, the Commonwealth countries? Do you think that has any relevance?
It's already there.
Yeah? Is that there for the fashion?
Yeah, but why should we say no to the money in Europe?
Okay.
It's closer.
Yeah.
And you make a better rate because it's closer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Australia, we're not even thinking about them.
Yeah.
We would
thinking about things that are across the road.
Exactly.
Geography does matter when it comes to trade. Absolutely. It just makes sense.
The price gets, we can't go lower.
Yeah.
This is something that has to be discussed.
Yeah. And the last thing is about IP, intellectual property. So at the moment, and trade regulation, trademarks. If we're aligned with Europe, we're staying with those deals.
Yeah.
How then do we navigate this Commonwealth landscape and this tertiary market landscape if we're staying within that, does that mean that somebody here's got to pay for more trademarks? We did an event in Westminster, and the issue of registering your trademarks because China's buying them was brought up. If we're on our own and we're isolated, are we going to have? Is it going to cost people more?
Yeah.
It will.
Yes. Okay. You will have to pay more.
Okay.
Right. So that's something that has to be discussed.
Yeah.
Because that's going to really kill the market.
Yeah.
Imagine everybody that's trading from London.
Yes.
Going to have a trademark everywhere?
Yeah. Or get a worldwide,
Yeah. Okay, but it's going to still cost more.
Yeah.
But it will cost more. And also, if you're not trademarked, but am I right? If you're not trademarked, but you're producing in the EU, you're still protected.
Yes.
Because you're an unregistered EU.
Yes, exactly.
Right, which we will lose.
Yes.
And is the
unless you have an agreement on that. You can still strike an agreement on anything. Don't forget that.
Yeah. So these are the issues that have to come up through Fashion Roundtable to the government, supporting and protecting the fashion.
Exactly.
We have been, but they haven't answered us on these.
Keep pushing.
You have to push it.
They take notes and look at me terrified.
I think an answer or a solution is not necessarily going to be in the form of a letter back. I think.
Yeah, exactly.
we will see the work that Fashion Roundtable does when these things are agreed.
Okay.
Just to kind of go back to your point, Tamara, about fishing, it's an area that no one really took much notice of.
No.
Let's just be honest, no one really took much notice of fishing. And the reason why fishing has played such a huge role is it is, yes, very important if you read into it and what it has done for our economy and so forth. Is that they represent huge amounts, a huge demographic in Scotland, and they pushed forward their concerns to their MPs, MPs who, majority of them SNP MPs, who then pushed it forward in the Commons. And we're not just talking about one or two, we're talking about a lot, more than about 15 or so MPs who feared that they would be deselected if they did not put forward the concerns of the fishermen and fisherwomen up in Scotland. So similarly, I mean, I know you can't target particular areas where fashion is, prominent across the UK, but you can push forward with your MP. Your MP is there to represent your views, your concerns, your fears. And if you put that forward, that MP will then put it forward to another MP on a committee, and then you'll get a debate in the Commons. And the more you do that, the more it will become headline news, basically.
Yeah.
And it's true. That's how they did it with fishing. Like I said, it wasn't a big deal before. No one really took much. It wasn't given much oxygen.
Fishing's going to be our marketing strategy.
It's
whatever we have to do.
Yeah, it's a good marketing strategy. Yeah.
Okay. I think that's it, everyone. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you for having us at SHOWstudio. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.